In at number 10, we have a knocker-upper. Okay, so this is not what you think it is. It sounds dubious, but this actually refers to a human alarm clock. The practice was very popular in working class towns in the UK and Ireland in the 1800s up until the mid-1900s. Knocker-uppers were people that used to have long sticks to knock on windows and often whistles to wake people up so they were on time for work. I mean, to be totally honest, the struggle must have been really real before alarm clocks existed, so these persistent fellows made sure that those who needed to be up were up. Unfortunately for them, the practice started to die out in the 1940s and 50s as alarm clocks became common practice in the home. Now, physical alarm clocks are pretty much over too, with the invention of phones that have that capability. In at number 9, we have a pinsetter. Pinsetters were the poor souls that had to brave big, heavy balls coming to crush them as they reset the 10 pins at a bowling alley. This job was usually a low-paid position taken up by teenage boys, although there was one huge benefit. Often the lads that worked this job were allowed to bowl for free. Pretty sweet if you're a kid that just wants to bowl. As automatic pin setters were introduced, the job slowly died out between the 1950s and the 1970s. Next up, we have an absolute Victorian classic. Coming in at number 8, we have the chimney sweep. While you can still pay companies to come and clean your chimney, the classic chimney sweep job, as it was popularised in literature by Oliver Twist, no longer exists. The chimney sweep that comes to mind is actually the main sweep's apprentice, a climbing boy as they were known. These were children as young as 4 years old who were tasked with climbing up a narrow chimney shaft to clear blockages. This would stop the chimneys from blowing smoke into a room, so it was kind of important. In at number 7, we have a lamplighter. Back when streets were lit by candlelight and gas lamps, lamplighters were employed to light and extinguish them. Lamplighters would usually light the streetlights with a wick on a long stick at dusk and then extinguish the flames at dawn. They would also carry out maintenance on the lights, making sure candles or the gas was replaced. These days, almost all street lighting is generated by electricity, so we no longer have a need for this profession. In at number 6, it would have been a great job for me at the time, we have a town crier. Hear ye, hear ye. That's what they say. Town criers used to be people who would ring a bell in a town or city centre and declare the news to all that would listen. These were the main sources of communication and information for townsfolk and the government. At this time, most people couldn't read, so they needed to hear the news. For example, if the King of England had a child, a town crier would ring his bell and announce it in the street to rapturous applause. The same would go for information regarding taxes or town notices, such as reminders not to urinate in the river the day before water was collected to make beer. Good times, those were the days. These days they do still exist for traditional festivals and occasions, but they aren't a proper salaried job, they'll almost always be held by volunteers. In at number 2, we have people that chose the latter. We have, of course, the classic vomit collector. So I suppose that vomit collectors still kind of exist in a way at theme parks, although really these are just park cleaners. Back in the Roman times, wealthy people would employ vomit collectors at banquets. Back in those days, feasts would last several hours and guests would vomit specifically so they could eat more. I mean, I love my food, but I think that's taking it a little bit far. They often did this in a special vomit collecting receptacle or simply chunned it on the floor. Those who deployed the receptacle emptied them and cleaned up the sick were the vomit collectors, and that must have smelled, well, you can imagine. Okay, so moving on from the disgusting to the actually kind of fun to finish this list, I really wish this job still existed because I think I would love it. Coming in at number 1, we have a bard. A bard was a musician, poet and storyteller who would be employed by a monarch or noble to literally sing their praises, which is probably actually where that phrase comes from. The bard would often follow its employer around telling musical stories of their accomplishments. So for example, if any of you have seen the Monty Python Holy Grail, this is like the minstrel who sings Brave Sir Robin. I really would enjoy either being a bard or having a bard. Can you imagine? Brave Rebecca was a YouTube host, she was great. Oh, she was. And then she made videos and went home and drank tea and what? That was really cringe. I'm so sorry. But I would like being a bard. Coming in at number 9, we have ice cutters. Ah, the life before freezers. Can you even imagine? These days, if I wanted some ice, I'd just go fill up my ice tray, pop it in the freezer and wait an hour or so. But it wasn't so easy back in the day. Before public refrigeration, people, usually strong men, used to cut up giant blocks of ice from lakes. Specifically, these were to be used as cooling blocks through the summer months. Being an ice cutter was a very dangerous job. Cutters would risk hypothermia, which they would almost inevitably get if they fell into the cut ice holes. Coming in at number 8, we have milkmen. Or women, because why not? Okay, so some small places in some countries do still have them, but by and large, the job of being a milkman no longer exists. Milkmen were prolific up until around the 1960s. Now this was when their jobs began to wane on account of the modern refrigeration systems. They also began to lose out to the abundant availability of milk in local convenience stores. Milkmen would drive around delivering fresh milk on quaint little carts and deliver them to people's door. I remember there being a milkman in the little village that I grew up in, but I really don't think they have him anymore. Most villages have let their milk people go, and to be honest, in the cities it's like a long past thing. Coming in at number 7, we have a miner's canary. Okay, sure, this isn't a human job, but nobody said it had to be. The hours were rubbish, the pay was non-existent, and the danger levels were high. Canaries were used as an early warning system for miners. Basically, the birds would constantly chirp, but if toxic gases such as methane and carbon monoxide were released, they would be the first to drop. It's pretty sad, isn't it? It's like a test canary. Basically, the miners knew that if the birds stopped chirping, they needed to get out of there immediately. Miners' canaries were used up until the late 80s. Coming in at number 6, we have a lector. Ooh, I like the sound of this job. Lectors were people hired to entertain factory workers during the earlier parts of the Industrial Revolution. Before the days of your favourite podcasts or even the radio, factory workers got pretty bored. To tackle this, workers either clubbed together to hire lectors to read to them, or if they were lucky, their bosses might pay for them. The lectors would read news articles or even popular books. Sometimes though, lectors were concerning to factory owners because they used to read out union material. Coming in at number 5, we have a coal stoker. I mean, who can be bothered to sit there stoking coal for hours on end? What a grueling job. Coal stokers were vital on steam engines and ships in the days before electronic engines. Stoking coal was indeed a grueling and arduous task. Workers would essentially just keep on shoveling coal onto a very, very hot fire. Coming in at number 4, we have a humour drainer. I mean, I know a few modern day humour drainers, but they're just dull people who don't get paid for being dull. Humour drainers actually used to do something entirely different than people who just suck fun out of situations. That's right, back in the days before modern medicine, roughly between the Egyptian and Greek eras, people had humours drained. What are you talking about? Well, doctors believed in 4 balancing elements called humours. These made up the human body, or so they thought. These humours were black bile, yellow bile, phlegm and blood, and when the humours were unbalanced, a person would be ill, according to ye olde doctors anyway. If someone had too much of one humour, they were treated. For example, if they had too much blood, they would have their blood drained. Blech. Coming in at number 2, we have a computer. A computer? A job? What are you on, Rebecca? No, seriously, a computer was the name given to people, usually women, who dealt with number data and calculation. The job was very popular between World War I and World War II and required applicants with excellent mental arithmetic skills. Okay, I mean, this one is pretty controversial, and I'm pleased it doesn't exist today because, well, creepy. Coming in at number 10, we have the head shape reader. What? Officially called a phrenologist, a head shape reader would measure your skull and its contours and then determine a person's intelligence based on the geometric observations. This is where terms like well-rounded, highbrow and lowbrow come from. While this practice had a steady following in Europe, it was most popular in 19th century America. Some people found the readings reassuring and empowering, others began to see it as a little bit racist. In the end, the process was stopped when it was discovered that head shape literally has no correlation to intelligence or any other personality trait. Coming in at number 9, we have log drivers. Back in the day before large lorries and trucks existed to transport timber, logs were floated down rivers to power water sawmills. These sawmills then cut logs into lumber. I imagine that fish are among the many species that are happy this practice no longer exists. Among many issues, log jams were pretty regular. This next job does still exist in some countries, but it is dying very quickly. Coming into number 8, we have coal miners. The UK famously famously closed the majority of its coal mines in the 1980s, with the last deep coal mine in the UK closed in December 2015. These days, energy is harboured in cleaner ways, and in 2017, Britain went a full day without using any coal power to generate electricity. This was the first time that had happened since the Industrial Revolution. In the US, mining still exists, but the entire coal mining industry employs less people than American food chain Arby's. Coal mining jobs are disappearing each day. In 50 years, there'll probably be no human miners left. A job that is now long gone. Coming in at number 7, we have pre-radar listeners. Now, I can't help but have a little laugh when I see a picture of a pre-radar listener. They look like they're involved in a strange art installation, and I kinda like it. But no, these guys are actually using Extremo earphones to listen out for enemy aircraft. The listeners predated radar, which revolutionized defense in the 1940s. Before that, in World War I and early World War II, these listeners were relied on heavily to stay one step ahead against the enemy. I mean, what a job! Can you imagine the fear that you would experience when you actually do hear something as well? Very stressful. Coming in at number 6, we have elevator operators, or as we'd say in England, a lift attendant. Have you seen the film Titanic? If so, you will have seen some classic lift attendant action. For these people, it was their job to move the elevator up and down and be kind of fancy while they did it. They would wear porter-style uniforms and ask things like, "Which floor, ma'am?" and you'd tell them 5, they'd press the button, it'd be very exciting. I feel like these are the ages of way more glamour. In those days as well, the elevators looked way classier, often with like ornate cages and stuff. Another job of times gone by, at number 5 we have film projectionists. Okay, so some old cinemas do still use film reels, but these are rare, and those working as projectionists are usually volunteers that just love vintage cinema. These days, cinema has largely gone digital, meaning that there's no real need for manual or often even human labour. I will always think that there is something a bit more romantic about reel-to-reel cinema, but maybe I'm just old-fashioned that way. Coming in at number 4, we have switchboard operators. I can't imagine a time where, when calling someone, I didn't get straight to the person I wanted to speak to. However, in my grandparents' time, this was very much the reality. Calling someone was a process. Switchboard operators connected long-distance calls, or on a smaller scale, within big households or businesses. Back in the day, phone calls were not digitally managed, which meant that switchboard operators had to connect calls using a number of different wires, which sounds very tangly for me. I don't do well with tangly things. The least ideal job possibly of all time is coming into number 1. We have the Groom of the Stool. Ooh, yep, let's spare a few thoughts for all of the people in history who had this rather stinky job. Lovely. Lovely. The Groom of the Stool was a role apparently created by King Henry VIII, and the poor soul that had to fulfill it was in charge of monitoring his bowel movements, and also wiping his butt, which, ugh, giant king poo. No thanks. The Groom of the Stool used to carry around a portable toilet as well as a towel and a wash bowl. Their day was usually focused around when the king needed to poop. So gross. As the job was rather intimate, this was usually rewarded handsomely with good pay and extra perks, like lodgings in the king's palace. Mad King George actually loved the Groom of the Stool so much that he employed 9 of them, which I think means he pooped like a lot. One of his Grooms of the Stool actually went on to be Prime Minister of the UK, so there we go. The job stopped happening around the time good sanitary and private toilets were invented and clothing became less elaborate.